What up YouTube? Today I will share with you an example to display the power of the two bishops. The bishop pair often gains its power in endgames when there are pawns on both sides of the board, as in the 23rd game in the World Championship of 1951 between Botvinnik and Bronstein. Bronstein was leading by 1 point in the World Championship before this game, so it's a highly relevant game. This is FIDE Master Noam Vitenberg back with the weekly upload. Monday and Thursday, 19 o'clock Central European Time and 11 o'clock Central European Time. I stream on Twitch. Check it out. The links will be in the description below. In this position, black goes bishop takes c1. Here, black removes the defender of the b3 pawn and wins a pawn in this operation. However, it comes at the cost of playing with two knights against two bishops. The additional pawn on the queen's side is also not so relevant as it's doubled. Hence, creating a passed pawn on the queen's side will be very difficult, while white enjoys the pleasant edge of the two bishops. King takes c1, knight takes b3, king c2 attacking the knight, knight a5, king c3, improving the position of the king. King f7, e4, and in this position black goes for f5. I'd like you to pause the video for 5 seconds and try and establish, is f5 a good move or not? It turns out that this move opens up the position, which is in the favor of the two bishops. Furthermore, some of the black pawns might get weak as a consequence of the move f5, so it was a serious positional inaccuracy. Let's see how Botvinnik will punish this. G takes f is played in the game. The take with the e-pawn isn't nearly as powerful, as after a lot of pawns are traded and bishop d3, black has the strong move king e6, keeping an eye both on the f5 and on the d5 pawn. Later we will see how this is highly relevant in the game. G takes f, bishop d3. Instead of taking on f5 straight away, white wishes to keep the tension open, as this could potentially result in the position opening up even further, which is favorable for the two bishops. This is going to be a recurring motive here, that to open up the position as much as possible with the two bishops is often advantageous in the endgame. King g6, trying to keep the position closed instead of taking on e4. Bishop d6, knight c6, and bishop b1. Slow maneuvers are being executed in the game. King f6, bishop g3, and in this position, it turns out that going back to g6 is not so simple. As after pawn takes f5, pawn takes f5, bishop a2, the pressure on the d5 pawn is highly inconvenient to deal with. And perhaps after a move like knight a b4, there will be bishop b3, and white will later play bishop d6, attacking the knight on b4, and then collecting the pawn on d5. And together with the two bishops, it will be a very strong passed pawn. So after king f6, let's say bishop d6 will be played, and white will successfully execute their plan. Which is why f takes e felt forced in this position. But this does open up the position for the two bishops, who strive to be on open positions in endgames. h6, bishop f4 attacking the pawn on h6, h5, taking on d5, and pawn takes d5. Now the pawns on d5 and h5 are long-term weaknesses, as we will see throughout the game. h4, knight a b8. It's difficult for black to establish a good plan. Bishop g5 is played. However, black did have the option to go knight e7, with the idea to place the knight on f5, from where it would exert a little bit of pressure on h4 as well as d4, so this was a more accurate alternative perhaps. An important detail is that the move bishop g5, king e6, bishop takes e7, king takes e7, bishop g6, parts with the bishop pair. However, white will be able to collect the pawn on h5, regaining the missing pawn. The thing is, though, that the pawn on h4 is the wrong color. It's the promotion square on h8 is the opposite color of the bishop. Hence, the bishop will not be able to control the promotion square. And as we know, a bishop with the wrong colored pawn is unable to win if we get the king on h8. So imagine this. the knight on a6 is able to sacrifice itself for the a4 and d4 pawn. And as a result, we could even give away all our pawns, all our 4 pawns. As a result, and the king is able to get an h8, white will not be able to make progress, and it's a typical drawn position with the wrong colored pawn on h4. So knight e7 and leading the knight to f5 has a better chance in this position. Knight ab8, bishop g5, king f7, bishop e5. The maneuvering continues. Knight a7, bishop f4, knight bc6, bishop d3, knight c8, bishop e2, king g6, bishop d3, king f6, bishop e2. White has the clear advantage in this position, and sometimes when you have an advantage in a certain position, it's favorable to repeat moves once, because then your opponent might think, aha, it's going to be a threefold repetition, and my opponent is going to let me escape with a draw. And then you play for the win, and your opponent will be a little bit unbalanced, as he would have thought that the game would soon be over and it would be a draw, but instead he needs to defend the worst position. So this is exactly what Michael Botvinnik is doing. King g6, and now finally bishop f3. This is what all the previous maneuvers were leading up to put the bishop on f3, from where it eyes the pawn on h5 as well as the pawn on d5. Knight 6 e7, bishop g5, and in this position, guess what black played? Black in fact resigned in this position, realizing that all his available moves ruined the position. A sample line goes b5. It's not possible to not lose a pawn in this position, as black every move will lose something in this position. So b5, a takes b, b6, king d3, and again black is in Zugzwang and needs to give away a pawn, and after bishop takes d5, white will be left up a pawn in this position, as well as the strong 2 bishops, which should help the d4 pawn promote in this position. I hope you got a better idea of the bishop pair's power in the endgame, and if you made it this far in the video, feel free to subscribe, like and share the video. See you next Tuesday.